My name is Lainey Williams. I'm a teaching artist at Arts for All Nevada, and I'm here today to give you a video lesson on how to paint a picture of the Reno Arch in celebration of the city's anniversary. Let's talk supplies. Gouache paints, which are light yellow, white, yellow, light blue, red, and blue. You can use any brand you want. I use Holbein, and then for these are Reeves paints in dark green and dark blue that I use for some extra dimension. Next, you'll see me using these brushes a lot. They're aquash brushes, but you can use any brushes you want. I just use these because they're the thinnest brushes that I had on hand. In addition, here's a larger round brush and a larger flat brush that I use for the washes you'll see, especially in the beginning part of the video. So to start, you're going to want to take your regular blue, I use my Holbein blue, and just fill wherever you don't have a sketch of the arch. So as you can see, the outline of it is sort of coming out. I know my pencil marks are kind of hard to see because I erased on them, but that was just so that they didn't show through very much in the finished painting. Next, mix some of your red with just a little bit of the yellow you have. You're not actually going for orange here, but the addition of the yellow is just going to brighten up and warm up that red you have, just enough so that it feels more warm than if you had just used red alone. In this section and in this part of the underpainting, in this early part of the painting, you're going to want to mainly use really watered down colors. I know that it feels counterintuitive that you'd want to lay down a really thick base on top of which you can add more detail, but having a light base over which you can paint in very thin layers of watery paint until the very end is going to help you to create the illusion that the colors are a lot more blended together. Now, after you're done filling in the basic shapes of the left side of the arch with this sort of orangey red color, this crimson, go ahead and do the same on the other side. You can keep your touch even a little bit lighter on this side since that side is going to be just a bit brighter than this left side if you want, but honestly, the main goal here is just to fill in with a base color that we can then layer different colors on top of. As you can see, on this right side, I'm actually using the yellowy red color as more of a highlight color, or really only keeping it to the left edge of this pillar, and that's because what we're going for is the image that this pillar is a little bit more angled away from us. So after you are done filling that part in, then you can darken the opposite side, which you'll see in just a second. But that just increases the appearance that, you know, this is a 3D thing. Yes, we're facing pretty head-on to the arch in this drawing, but all the same, just creating that little illusion of depth can really help a drawing, or a painting, rather, pop. Now on both sides of the painting, on each of the pillars, you may notice that I'm keeping the paint just a little bit lighter in hue. I may add a little bit more yellow on the bottom part of the pillars as opposed to the top, and that's because we're imagining this as part of the street even though we're not painting the whole street, and so that means there are a lot of other lights and street lights and lights from cars that are closer to the bottom part of the street. So even though there are a lot of light bulbs all around the actual arch itself, there's also a lot of light coming at the arch from the bottom. Okay, so now we're going to start filling in the arch itself, and you're going to want to almost do the opposite thing of what you just did. So whereas before we had red with just a hint of yellow, now we're using yellow with just a hint of red to soften it so that it doesn't look so extreme, especially since we're going to want to add really yellow light bulbs later on, or yellow white. But anyway, fill in everything on the arch except for the Reno sign itself, which, because it has pink neon on it, we're going to fill in with more of a red-pink color in just a moment. But yeah, just fill in this whole area, and then just like with all of the other parts of the painting, we can go back and add more and more detail in small layers. On this bottom section, if you want to add just a tad more red to really warm that section up, you can do so. Since this is further away from the light bulbs at the top, even though there are light bulbs on this section as well, it still looks a little darker. As you can see, I'm taking my larger round brush and beginning to fill in the center part of the sign. This is the part that says, "the biggest little city in the world," which is a phrase we've all heard throughout our lives, I'm sure. Just like everywhere else, you can fill this in with just a thin layer of red. As you can see, I'm using a whole lot of water here to spread the pigment around. This is going to create a more even wash, and then as we go over it with more red throughout the painting, that'll add more of that super saturated red you may be more familiar with. Now, as you can see, we're beginning to get into the details of the painting, but before we do that, let's go over the blue wash that we have as our background and add another layer to sort of even it out. Up till now, you might have thought, oh, this is pretty patchy, but as you add more layers on top, you may find that that effect goes away. So over the top, I just mixed together a little bit of that dark blue I showed you earlier, and then over the bottom, some of the regular blue Holbein gouache and some of the light blue Holbein gouache. This is really up to your discretion. Use whatever colors you feel best suits your gradient. But next up, after we're done with that, go ahead and start in on your dark parts of your pillar. As you can see, I've already started. So while this may look like black, what you're actually going to want to do is mix together some of that dark green and some of your red gouache. This is going to create an effect that's similar to a black paint, but instead of giving that really, really stark contrast that black might, almost like ink, this is going to blend in more nicely with the red we have underneath, while still creating a lot of contrast because we're using a dark green, which is opposite from red on the color spectrum. So fill in most of the top of this pillar, and then as you move downwards, leave some spaces where the red peeks through. This will give that effect of something metallic that's reflecting a little bit of light, but is maybe further away from the light source, since the top part is the furthest away from the street, and as we discussed before, the street is really bright. I also want to point out real quick that I have changed brushes, and this is the brush that I'll be using for most of the painting. I use a really, really fine brush to make most of my details because I like a really clean, crisp finish. However, if you prefer to blend out your colors more, or if you're working on a larger canvas, a larger brush will work just fine. As you move down toward the bottom of the pillar, you'll see that I'm transitioning to a really dark, watery red. So my brush might still have a little bit of the green on it, and that's okay because it's darkening the red and giving it that vibrancy. But as you move towards the bottom, really try to keep the red very red. Keeping it watery will also help your colors blend together as you move up and down the pillar. This isn't a perfect process, of course, and you can see that I'm jumping up and down on the pillar to add more red details and then moving back downwards. So use whatever workflow works for you, but just generally keep in mind that you want the top to look darker with a few spots of red, and then the bottom to have red with maybe a few highlights of yellow-orange, which you can see that I'm adding in now. Once you start feeling good about the thickness and opacity of the colors you have on the bottom of your arch, you can fill in with a very fine line, with just a little bit more of that mixture of red and green to create almost an outline on the edges of the pillars, and then do the same thing on the edge of the sign. Once you're done with that, go ahead and lay down another layer of watery red on your sign. Like I mentioned earlier, this will get rid of that sort of patchy effect and give us a nice, even, deep tone of red that we will be able to lay our white letters over really nicely and create a lot of contrast. Now on the right side pillar, again, we're using slightly lighter colors, but you're still going to want to have it darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. So on the sides of this pillar, I'm filling in with the same dark red that I was just using to fill in the center of the sign. And then on the front facing or almost front facing edges, which are much wider, I'm going to be filling it in with that same mixture of red and green, although this time I'm watering it down a little bit more so that it blends onto that lighter red we have on the right hand side and looks just little bit different. from the left-hand side. Now, even though this is our brighter side, just to create a little bit of drama, I'm going to go in with the mixture of green and red and create kind of a stark highlight or stark contrast at the very bottom of this side of the arch. And what that's going to do is just emphasize how bright parts of the arch really are. Now you're going to want to go in again with your red and just start marking out highlights. So wherever you want there to be a highlight, just surround it with red so that it looks again like that shiny metal effect, which is the same thing we did with the green-red mixture and the red on the other side on the left pillar, but we're doing it sort of in a more gentle way on this side. So leave just a little bit of yellow. And then as you move back up the pillar, anywhere that you feel like your red is not as robust as you want to be, just go ahead and fill it in with another layer of red. The important part with water-based mediums, or really any painting, is not to rush it, because there really is no rush. So take your time and really make sure your colors are exactly how you want them to be. And then as you can see, one more time, we're just going to go over the top part of the painting with a mixture of our regular blue and our dark blue to really fill out the background and make sure that it looks even. For this next part, we're going to go back over that Reno section of the sign and just really fill in this color, which I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but is a mixture of the red and the light yellow. So if you don't have that specific light yellow color, you can always just mix red, yellow, and white. But the point here is, once again, to get the colors really, really even. As you can see, I'm still using a pretty watered down version of this pinkish yellow color, but I am making an effort to really fill in every gap and every section, so that when we lay down our darker and then our lighter layers on top of it, it really stands out and you feel like you're looking at the actual sign, or at least a good representation of it. want to take that color, that same yellow red, and start to define the 2 layers of sort of mini arches that you have surrounding the Reno sign by creating this warm shadow of a pinkish yellow red color. As you can see, the closer that I get to the division between the 2 arches, the darker the red I'm using gets, and that's because I really want to emphasize that these are 2 separate sections and create that layered effect. As you're filling in these side sections, anytime you feel like you need to blend out the color of the sign with the little mini arches, just go ahead and take a little bit of that pinker color and blend it into the more orange color that you'll end up with on either side of the Reno sign. And then as you can see, I'm just darkening the top edge of the biggest little city in the world sign a little bit more, because that bright yellow will make it harder for the light bulbs that we're going to place on top of them to stand out. So both on the top and bottom edge of this sign, just go ahead and fill in with a very, very thin, watery layer of orange. As you can see, I'm leaving just the very bottom part of this arched sign mostly yellow, and that's because that's where you're going to have a high concentration of light bulbs that are in front of each other instead of above and below each other relative to the viewer, which means that they're going to seem even brighter, and so their background also seems even brighter. Next, take that red and just go back over again on either pillar, either side of the arch, just to really, really define those edges. Now our goal is opacity, where before we weren't really that concerned about whether or not our layers of colors were opaque. Now that we're adding more and more layers, we really are trying to get that crisp detail and the crisp, sort of even bright color on each section of the arch. Okay, now we're going to start preparing to lay down our glowy parts of the painting, which means actually what we want to do is darken those areas first, so that there's a really high contrast between the glowing neon that we're painting and the stuff that's behind it or right next to it. So you can see here I'm filling in just almost in block letters in a slightly darker but still watery red, the letters of Reno. This marks out where we're going to put our white lines of neon in just a moment. But for now, all this will really do is 1, give us a guideline as to where we're going to put our lines, but 2, create that extra little bit of contrast that gives the illusion of glow after we've laid them down. As a final touch before we start drawing the lines themselves, go in with just a little bit of watery yellow along the bottom parts of the sign. This will create the effect that something is reflecting up towards the neon lights, and just looks pretty fun, honestly. Okay, so now we're finally getting into the neon itself, and for this part, you really don't want to use a watery line at all. I know that at first it's hard to see the white that I'm using, but you really want to load your paintbrush up with a lot of gouache and then just enough water that you can move it along the paper, because we want a really, really bright, defined color, as opposed to where before our goal was to blend our colors in with each other and on the paper, which is why we were using such thin, watery colors. I also do want to point out to you that in every letter of the Reno part of the sign, there are 4 lines. So just make sure to keep track of that. I know with the E it's a little tricky, but just remember that the 2 outer lines go all the way around, and then the 2 inner lines arch through the inside of the E and then move across in that middle line. But we're not even there yet. I'm still working on the R. As you can see, I'm going over with layer after layer of white paint to really make sure that each line is distinct and stands out from each other. Although at the end of the painting, we are going to go back over everything with just a little bit of red to really define those lines. Just remember, wherever you want a lot of saturation, patience really is key. With gouache, it's only possible to lay down so much color at any given time. Even though it's more pigmented than watercolor, it's still not acrylic and it's still not oil. So your best bet for creating a really even wash of color is always to just be patient and do several layers until it stands out as much as you want it to. Sorry about that jump right there. I think my camera stopped working for a little bit. But anyway, after you're done filling in the Reno neon to your heart's content, just take a little bit of that light blue, or just blue mixed with white, if that's all you have, and go ahead and outline the edges of the arch. This is in preparation for adding our light bulbs, and even though we still do want to have a lot of contrast between the lights in the background to make them look like they're really glowing, adding this lighter shade of a cool color will still give the effect that the arch is standing out against the background because of the light that it's emitting. And now finally, after you mix together a lot of white and a little bit of yellow, it's finally time to start adding the light bulbs around all the edges of the pillars and of the arch itself. So this is pretty straightforward, honestly. Just, again, use a lot of paint and just a little bit of water so you can get really bright white, yellow lights, and just go around all of the edges of the arch. Wherever you see me dotting, go ahead and dot. You don't really need to be precise on how many to put. As long as it looks like it's just lit up all over the place, you're good to go. As you can see, even here where you might think that it's just as simple as dotting, which is what I just said, but even then, if you're not happy with the brightness of your bulbs, you can always go back over those same dots and just add a little bit of extra pigment. Like I mentioned before, you can see just the barest hint of the underside of the arch in this perspective. So when you're adding to the bottom of the arch, just add in that little extra bit of super bright lights before going over the front bottom part of the arch. Okay, our final step is to add in the big spiky ball at the top of the arch, which is a really fun process because, again, it's so far away and it's so complicated that there's no reason to be really specific about it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is take a mixture of dark green and red, just like you did before, and draw a very short little line between the E and the N at the top of the Reno sign. Then, just a little bit above that, leaving some space, make a dark circle of the same color. As you're waiting for that to dry, you can go ahead and go around your pillars once again with that same dark color and just make really fine lines anywhere that you feel like the pillars need a little bit of extra definition or a little bit of extra crispness. Okay, once you're done with that and the top part where you created your little ball is completely dry, take some red and just draw a few really long spikes coming out of it. It might be hard to tell that it's red in this angle, but just trust me, it's not that same dark color, it is red, which is just a little bit warmer than it would be if we used the dark green and red mix. And then apart from those 4 really long spikes, draw some shorter ones, and then wait a little bit for those to dry. While you're waiting for that to dry, go ahead and mix a little bit of yellow into the red that you were just using, because we're going to be layering lighter and lighter colors of spikes into the center of this big spike ball. And as you can see now, I'm going ahead and doing just that. And this creates the effect again of glowing, but in a different way, where we have that darkness at the center, but then we're laying things on top of it. Because some of the spikes are pointing away and some of them are pointing towards the viewer, having some darkness there is good because it shows that dimension. So yeah, as you go, just add progressively lighter and lighter colors further and further in to the center of the spike ball so that as the eye moves outward, you see darker and darker lines. Once you're happy with the brightness at the center of your spike ball, go ahead and mix up just a little bit of that green and red mix once again, and make some little tiny dashes around the edges of the spike ball. Like I mentioned before, the darker a spike is, the further away it will appear to be. So creating some of those little half-seen dark spikes will make it appear more round and spherical to the viewer. And then our final touch is going to be to take a thick opaque red and just go around wherever we feel like maybe the white lines of the neon sign have bled together a little bit and we want to define them a little more sharply. This is the last thing we're going to do before lettering in the biggest little city sign and adding in our final touches. So for this section, the key is really to have a thick layer of paint on your brush. It doesn't matter if you have to keep going back and getting a little bit more paint, because our goal here is to have these letters be really bright and stand out against the sign, which isn't that hard because the white is so much lighter than the red that we laid down, but still. Because this sign in real life is lit from behind, we want it to have just a little bit of that glow. The only other tip I can give you is to pace yourself in terms of the placement of the letters on the sign, and try and eyeball where in sort of the curve of the arch each word falls. When I was writing this, I found it helpful to say, okay, well, city is right beneath the N, and biggest, it ends at the start of the R. Just little benchmarks like that can help you to have a really even lettering all the way across and not run out of space or have too much space when you're done. After that, our very last step is going to be to mix together some white and just a little bit of yellow and draw little tiny circles at the very top of the spike ball. There are just these circles sort of surrounding it in the photo that I had, so just put them wherever looks right to you. There's really no instruction or rhyme or reason to it, so have fun with it. You can also use that color you just mixed up to go in and add a few little highlights wherever you feel like the light of the light bulbs all around the sign would be reflected in the metal of the poles. This video, of course, is presented by Arts for All Nevada, so I'm just going to go ahead and add in their logo here at the bottom. That's not a mandatory step for you, but I wanted to show where this came from, and also it's just good to draw in a little Nevada wherever you can. We love our state. Thank you for joining in and watching this tutorial today. I hope you enjoyed it and feel like you learned something. Here's a scan of my finished painting. I'm sure that yours looks just as wonderful, if not more.